Welcome, everyone. This is so fascinating to go live again, and now with a very important and I would say timely topic around conscious aging. So, I'm Lana Yelenev, co founder of Neurodiversity Education Academy, and um, with us right now is the co founder of Hekate Conscious Aging Foundation. I'll let Milena introduce herself, but before that, with me also is Saskia, my co-founder for NEA. Saskia, would you want to share a few highs and hellos?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to have you join us or rewatch this later. And I'm really curious to get into it with Milena.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity for this beautiful conversation. I'm Miléna, as Lana mentioned, co-founder of Hekate Conscious Aging. I am a Gestalt therapist and basically working and originally from Hungary, and I've been living in the Netherlands for 9 years now. And I think that's enough for now because I will continue to talk about more about conscious aging later.
Yeah. Well, Milena, I really have a curiosity around conscious aging. And I know we've had this conversation months ago where I approached you with this questions that I have around the intersections of conscious aging and neurodivergence, and how do we address this topic, especially in in a community that is very much here in the now, and probably has not even really explored what conscious aging is about. I myself am in the process of understanding what conscious aging is. So, in your own words, what do you mean by conscious aging, and why do we have to think about it or advocate for it?
Well, conscious aging, I mean, it's a very relevant question because aging is happening naturally. So, what is the issue? Why is it important to integrate this element of consciousness? And I think, and this is the mission of our foundation, is really to turn aging into opportunity. And by doing so, changing completely the current somehow toxic narrative of aging. Because when we are talking about aging, basically we are talking about conscious lives. And we are in a situation which is, with first time in human history, we live the life expectancy in most, I mean, in the northern, in the global north is 80 or 90 years. So we gain a lot of extra years, and the conscious aging part is how we turn these extra years into a meaningful long life where we can contribute to our own, happiness and meaningful life, but also to our communities, to our societies. And the conscious aging part is really how to live a fulfilled, a joyful life and make conscious choices. It's really like little tiny, from a scale of tiny little actions and decisions to, depending on the topic, bigger, more conscious and more designed action and decisions. And for example, one tiny little thing can be related to our health. Am I going to take the stairs instead of the elevator? And there are other topics like, housing and living and learning that might have a bigger consequences or need more reflections.
Hmm. I know in our conversation, you've also shared with me how conscious aging and the philosophies that you have at the Hekate Foundation is around permaculture.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know more about that.
I'm always a little bit reluctant to talk about permaculture because it's again a new concept. But permaculture, how can I say, there are a lot of definitions, but basically how to apply nature's wisdom when we when building and designing sustainable systems and ecosystems. And in our work as an organization, but also in all our activities, we use the permaculture ethics, which is very simple. It's people care, earth care, and fair share. And basically, what we see is how can, and when we are talking about conscious aging, how people care, starting with ourselves, as care for ourselves, care for our little communities, care for our bigger communities, but and also care for the earth, because um, we are whole with the whole Mother Earth and the planet. And also these solidarity aspects, which is very important, because conscious aging and conscious living for us also comes with solidarity with what I mentioned, people and living and non-living uh, being around us. So this is how we are applying social. We call it social permaculture because basically we are using the leading principle of permaculture, which is there are like 12, but it's really, again, it's very basic, not rocket science principles to adapt and to use and to apply when working with communities or in a family. Just to give you a short or some example is small, small scale, slow solutions. It's typically what nature does. I mean, it's trying and start with a small scale, look if it works or not, make adjustment, accept feedback. This is also a new principle. And basically, this is how we work. But again, it's nothing very theoretical. It's, nature is very pragmatic. So it's a very pragmatic approach.
Saskia, do you have questions?
Yeah, well, this first of all makes me very curious about if you have some examples of projects like this. What does that look like on a practical level?
Yes, so basically our foundations, we have different activities, and one of the activities, education and raising awareness. Where raising awareness about, conscious aging and the different aspects of conscious aging. The conscious aging approach is a holistic approach. So basically covers all the aspects of life, individual life, community, and at the social level. And just to name a few, like mental health, physical health, spirituality, housing and living, but also learning and lifelong learning and education. There is a big aspect which we always emphasize. This is the digitalization, because we are living in a digital. It's not digital world and human world. It's a technosphere, so it has become a whole. So digital part and how digitalization and technology integrates into our lives at every level is really important part of conscious aging. And other than that, the social network, and in this setup, it's very important to emphasize how the social connections, our interconnectedness and relations to our local communities, which can be the family, friends, colleagues, but also local communities or religious communities or whatsoever, just with the neighbors, is how important it is. And regarding, having a long, meaningful, and healthy life, social relations and social network is a high importance, impacting really every level of our lives. So therefore, one of the, coming back to your original question, Lana, one of the activities is really education. We have a couple of social innovation, like how to use permaculture in a community setup. How can we build resilient communities? And here we are working with communities with very different background, communities with migrant background, communities like neurodivergent people. So all type of um, communities with different needs and different aspects. And we are also doing advocacy. So there, our activities has a policy level and also consultancy, because sometimes, even organizations and for-profit organizations are interested into intergenerational cooperation, and it's very good. And I'm just realizing that this is the first time I'm mentioning intergeneration, because the whole aspect of conscious aging is that we are living 4 or 5 generations together again, first time in history, in human history, together. So this intergenerational collaboration, understanding, um, facing all the challenges that are happening around us is a crucial point of our act and a crucial aim of our activities and mission.
Beautiful. Yep.
Yeah, you've pointed out so many important parts, like the parts around importance of social networks. And we know, especially when you're divergent, the tendency for loneliness is higher. And not just, we're not just seeing that with adults, but also with teenagers. And then my question goes to, oh, how more with those that are in midlife and elderly? How are their rates of loneliness then? And then another part that you've mentioned is around education, which I love that you're advocating for, because like what you mentioned, we've lengthened our time of being alive as humans. And I don't know what the age of what's this retirement is for most countries, but if we're thinking of people retiring in their 60s, then we still have a good 20 to 30 years that we're looking at. And we have not designed the life for that. What we've designed for is a life towards retirement, but there's no life after retirement. And all our systems, our practices have been geared towards that. So, re-educating ourselves on what is possible for for that phase is also very important. And lastly, and another point that is very much alive for me is what you've said, the intergenerational component is where we are at right now as a society. And I know for a fact that a lot of countries are facing an aging population. And all the more that these intergenerational relationships need to be built and strengthened, because of how, who is supporting whom in these different generations is very important. So thank you very much for sharing the different ways in which your foundation has been involved in this advocacy. Saskia, I know you have this very important
Yes.
question.
Well, I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about what your approach would be. What I see very much with the people that I work with is that what comes together there is because it's a somehow vulnerable group. People with neurodivergence tend to have a lot of extra weight on their lives because they live in a not very neurodivergent friendly world yet. We're getting there. It's getting much better. There's more awareness out there and more support out there than ever, maybe. But it's still a pretty tough place to exist in. And I think this is probably true for many other vulnerable or minority groups, is that with all these things that Lana described going on, there's a bigger group of elderly people. People are having children later. So many of us are part of the sandwich generation. If we have kids, then we are probably taking care of younger kids at the same time that we are taking care of elderly parents if we're in midlife. If we are elderly, maybe a lot of neurodivergent people also choose not to have kids. So unless they build intergenerational bonds with other people, tend to get very lonely at an older age. And also there's this executive functioning burden. So very often if people have executing functioning trouble, they are already in a quite stressed state all the time. And people in a stressed state exist very much in the now. They don't have very much brain power left over to think about the past or to think about the future. And so only if there are very clear context clues do people start to think about that. So for me, I'm now seeing I'm taking care of my elderly parents. And as things come up with them, I am triggered a little bit to respond to that and think about, like, how would that be for me? How would I want to approach this stage in my life? But also I push that away because I'm busy in the now fixing the problems. So that's a very long introduction, but I felt I needed to give you some context around the question. But my
And
question really is, how can we help people take tiny little steps towards conscious aging if they're in that kind of an environment and in that kind of a state?
I will answer first your question, but what you just said, there are so many points I want to refer to later. So I start answering the question. And I think, the first thing we always say, and this is also a little bit of using permaculture, is nature. So, and gardening. You asked, how is it possible? And I think what we see and what we always suggest as one of, activities that is very good for mental health, to create social bonds, is, just to go to or create a community garden. Or if someone is really don't want to, because then you can become a part of a community without really wanting to interact too much. Typically, gardens or forest or nature in any setup, but community gardens are an excellent collector of every generations. I mean, nature appeals and triggers every generations, older people, younger people, all kind of neurodivergent people. I pretty sure that nature itself can, because it has this calming effect and nurturing effect. And there is also, you can scale, you want to, and the other aspects of gardening, and it can be a balcony garden, honestly, just to keep focus, just to use your senses. And growing a tomato plant, it's everything, it's life, it's caring, it helps to develop your senses, your caring attitude, and just to try out and experiment a little bit of becoming partner with your neighbors, with your just close neighbors who might want some of your tomatoes, or who might regroup or come with you and grow, I don't know what, cucumber or whatsoever. So find a place, and typically, as I mentioned, nature and garden is a place which can give a lot of space, not to come too close, very calming effect, and you can really decide how much invest to it. But growing a tomato plant, honestly, doesn't require a lot of investment, yet it can open, just to become a member of a local group, and you can always see. So this is one example, but there are a lot: music or reading clubs, everywhere where you can, just focus and develop your sensing and connection to yourself and calming your state. The question, and it depends of the person, of course, what the person finds hobby or joyful. You mentioned, the sandwich generation and the care element of, and this is why I mentioned we are building a caring society. I think one of the importance of conscious aging at the community level is that sandwich generation, typically have, or the sandwich generation, our people have the more care burden, because the community around us cannot provide. This is not a caring ecosystem. We as a family, we as a person has to, organize the kids, the elderly the elderly relatives, And you mentioned we see in our communities that people at age of 70 are still caring for the elderly because we live extremely long. So this elderly generation is now from 40 to almost 70, basically. And I think if we want to make it our own, on our own, we cannot. It's physically not sustainable. We don't have the resource, we don't have the time, and we have to care for ourselves. So this is why we say an intergenerational approach. Those who have a little bit, and aging comes with more disponibility, you have more availability in time, in mind space, because if you have children, they grow older. So, and typically isolation comes with age, as you mentioned, Saskia. So very often older people feel themselves isolated. And there is again how we turn this into an opportunity, how older people can contribute and give, a kind of like this gift economy. What can they, how can they contribute to this caring society when everyone has a need of care, but very often they can be, somehow contribute or complementary. And of course, it's not the individual level, but thinking of how can I contribute to my younger, my kids, and maybe and how older people, as I'm aging, can contribute with the resources and assets I have as an extra.
Yeah, I love that idea of the community garden, but I also here in Amsterdam see that there have been some living projects where people have designed housing to be separate apartments, but very close together. So, for instance, a younger person living in an apartment on top of their parents living in the apartment below, so that they're very, very close. And in fact, even though there wasn't a specific housing project for this, that's a similar choice to what my family has made, is to stay very close to both our parents because we knew, actually, because my husband edited a documentary many years ago about people taking care of their parents, that it would be a big burden if we had to travel very far every day just to be in connection with our parents at the time that they started to need more care.
And
So
I love this example, Saskia, because this you asked what are the actions and decisions, and I conscious decisions. This, we are making a lot of conscious choices, but typically housing and where to live and in which house, it's something that we need to consider, not when the need is there, but long before.
yes, long before that.
So your
I think
example is typically a right example of how to make a conscious decision when it comes to how we will care to our aging parents, how we will care into, with grandchildren if we have some, or any relatives.
yeah, I apologize. Somehow my camera managed to switch itself off, but I'm still here, and I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear. And one of the things that was so relevant in what you've just shared, Milena, is of creating that hubs where people can gather, where people can convene, is very, very important. This is also what we've been doing with the work with Neurodiversity Foundation and Neurodiversity Education Academy, whether it's in our community gatherings or in our Neuro Emergence, which is our annual conference. It's the idea of how can we have spaces or places people can convene and meet each other, connect, and be able to create that field of relationships. But I love there's a comment in the chat wherein she mentioned that she was making jams and sharing it with neighbors, and these small acts are ways of convening. Somehow for me, being a Filipina and coming from the Philippines, we're very much I would say a we centric society, and this idea of living with your grandparents, is something not foreign at all in my experience growing up. And I know society has shifted as well, that some families have been moving to cities and moving away from the provinces. So this is also a big part of the evolution that we're seeing in society, right? So my question here is, alongside creating these spaces for convening, is it seems like there's an institutional response that also needs to take place.
Absolutely, Lana. And one of our actions, one our mission in Hekate Conscious Aging is really to promote and to foster and to support, to grow these local communities. Um, what I wanted, but there is, I always see the individual level, the community level, and the social level, because some actions can be similar, but very often the dimension and the questioning or how we make decisions is different. And if I see the intergenerational aspect at an individual level, it's I always say it's really simple. I know that the mindset behind is, you need to shift the mindset. But I'm telling you an example. I have a neighbor, the next house, and she's a lovely older, you know, I don't know, in her 80s, and she's always inviting me for a coffee. And I know that a lot of times I don't have time for that. So I say, oh no, not now, not now. But sometimes I say, it's never the real, it's never really the good time to go for a coffee. So I put it in my agenda just to be sure that I will send and I will take a coffee. And honestly, it's so nurturing. And again, because these intergenerational connections doesn't really happen naturally, because of our lifestyle, of our spaces, communal spaces, I think this is where some extra consciousness and action is needed to reach out. And I truly believe, and talking about my own personal experience, having these older friends and older, I'm really meaning like in their 80s, it helps me to put my struggles, my life questions into perspective. And having younger generation, my niece, my nephew, it also helps me to put, to follow what's going on with the world now and putting from a different perspective what are the decisions I'm making. And one of the questions you mentioned, Lana, that currently a lot of people thinking about pension age, the pension age, and after we still have 20 and 30. When I'm talking about, and I think we have to be aware of that it's not sure that we might have a pension at all. And talking about younger generations, typically they don't think that they will have a pension. So again, it helps, to open the perspective and think and integrate different elements and different potential future and see react of, okay, how do I see myself? What is my strategy is a big word, but how am I positioning myself?
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, Milena, and something I connect to really as a coach. But I've tried to solve my camera problem, by the way, but it doesn't seem to be working. So I'll just participate in audio. I'm so sorry. But yeah, as a coach, that's often, of course, what I do when I work with people is to help them bring different viewpoints to the issues that they're dealing with. And I love what you're describing. If a conscious aging strategy is to be in touch with people from many different ages, that also prompts you to view your own life and your own choices from the perspective of being younger and from the perspective of being older. And I think that's a wonderful, very natural way to bring a coaching technique to life without necessarily needing to work with a coach. So it's beautiful.
And honestly, this, because there is a lot of fear, there is a lot of, resistance towards aging. But what happens every time when I'm talking to my very dear friend Leni, who is 80 years old, and I every time I feel like aging is a gift. Aging is good. And I don't want to have this, toxic positivity, because there are aging is physically a decline. So I don't want to deny all, the negative aspects of aging. But I think what and when I'm also talking with my younger siblings, I wouldn't be 20 years old now, honestly. I'm very happy to be in my 50s and done all what I've already done. So it puts it lightened, it makes in a very, a much lighter perspective, and brings the opportunities and the values, how precious it is to age.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that is coming up for me, and this is something that, Saskia, you've touched on, and Milena, you've touched on already, is we know that, as a society, we're still redefining what aging is, and especially with that component of how do we age consciously. So it's like, oh, it's like that's a deeper layer to aging. And now we're adding another layer to aging, which is around neurodivergence and aging, which for me, how I see it is, it's so challenging also to be confronted with aging, especially if you have, say, for example, relationships with your aging parents who are not so desirable, right? And this goes with what we know around trauma and experiences of neurodivergence growing up with parents who have not been supportive, or who don't know what they know, don't know. And that has built up a lot of conflict and tension throughout the years. So this layer of looking at conscious aging from also that lens of neurodivergence, I'm in my head, I'm just really like, oh, how much work that is as well, to be in a space to think about your own aging consciously and to respond to your elders in a way that is harmonious or positive. So there's a lot of healing involved here that I'm hearing in terms of how we can relate with ourselves, for neurodivergents who would want to live consciously and would want to make those decisions consciously. And yeah, I'm just sitting with that there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of healing that seems to be important in this space of conscious aging, or looking at how we can contribute to conscious aging.
And Lena, I think it's a very good point, because I refer to good examples, but I think, and relationship with parents is always a little bit, it's more complex, let's say. And I think in the healing process, it can be a brilliant source to say, what do I want to do the same way as my parents? And what do I want to do completely differently? And I think when it comes to aging, having parents, at advanced stage, it gives us, the opportunity to reflect on, okay, how do I want to live? What are the decisions I want to make? And I think and one of a member of the Unfolding, this conscious aging program, said, I learned more about, the negative examples than from the positive examples, which also, it's also clarity if you know what you don't want to do or how you don't want to do. and agree with that. It also it gives an opportunity for healing, for coming into peace, and yeah, self acceptance. Aging, I think the process itself creates a lot of space for self acceptance.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful point. And I think what might be a struggle, especially part of the neurodivergent community is, of course, ADHD. And with ADHDers, we often say like there are only two times: there's now and there's not now. It's very hard to sort of hang above the timeline and see the interconnectivity between the now and the what's coming later and the past. And we sometimes need to really put in some effort to create that space. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how to do that. Say you are in relationship with aging parents who maybe had undiagnosed neurodivergence, and so there's been a lot of trouble in the relationship in the past because of dealing with people with unmanaged neurodiversity themselves. They were struggling. They maybe didn't have enough space for you as a kid. And now, as an adult, you're taking care of them. And you want to bring a little bit of space for this thinking about, okay, you do things your way, I do things my way. Being in connection with you also helps me consider how I want to grow old. But how do you then, in the very stressful and busy now, make space for thinking about that in a way that's respectful between those two parties, and taking a little bit that umbrella view, or that bird's eye view of the timeline?
I'm not sure to understand, Saskia. Are you asking for, a concrete action? How would I work, or what would I do if I
Yes,
would?
if you have some suggestions for what you.
The first thing that pops up in my head is really storytelling. And storytelling can be, just write down here and now what pops up for you when this is happening. Just free writing, or just to, I don't know if you are doing, but sometimes I'm alone and I'm talking, I'm just telling a story to myself. It's my way of integrating. And this you can do in the bathroom when you are alone, under the douche, just storytelling.
Mhm.
Put it in a story, write it down if it helps, or draw, or really put it out in any way which is comfortable for you. And I don't know if it's relevant, but it can be, because I don't know, the exact situation, but, a story about yourself as your parent, as someone who is 80 years old in the garden, and it's not thinking about the future, it's not the complexity of time, it's just a role play, like
Mhm.
me being an elderly in my garden, in my kitchen. What do I drink? How do I move? Um, what do I perceive? It's just getting aware of how I can imagine myself at the age of 80. It can be frightening, honestly, but it's very playful. And I would bring this into this, how to how to tame, and the heaviness of time, which we don't know what we have, and we don't know. I love when, living in the here and now, it can be a gift, because I am pretty much in this conscious aging, like, preparing for the future and so on and so on. But it's also this heaviness that comes with it. And I don't know what the future brings. So maybe I will be hit by a car tomorrow. So, and from this perspective, turning an opportunity in the here and now, who can I be, how I am now at 80, how I am an 80-year-old woman today, and just play with it. It's
Mhm.
and this is the, this is the first thing that pops up in my mind. It's just play, just to tame, just become friend with your older you, and incorporate or and I don't know if it can help, because I'm not, myself, I don't think, or at least I'm not diagnosed as a neurodivergent people or person, but it's, I'm thinking about really basic playfulness,
Mhm.
playing, storytelling, touching, or just play of how could it be to be an an older people, like not being able to move. By the way, it happens when you have an accident or an injury, and think, okay, how is it not to have my whole mobility? So these little experimentations, and see that there is always, what I see when I'm experimenting with it is I becoming aware of my limitations, but I also see, the potential and what stays, what remains as space of moving differently, or, finding other ways. And this whole conscious aging is like, instead of focusing, like a little bit of the positive, not very much like positive health, instead of focusing on what won't work, focusing what will, and how can we create it. And this, again, with not exploring in the here and now. And I understand I have some difficulties into, incorporate, but the here and now there brings a lot of opportunities to explore this.
And I love your idea to bring playfulness to it. I think a lot of really great creativity exercises bring scarcity, bring limitations, and then say, okay, what can you still do? Given these boundaries, what can you still do? I think you probably need boundaries to be really creative. So yeah, having thoughts experiments like that sounds like something that could be fun, unless you trigger a real stress response in thinking about all the difficulties.
Uh, uh, what's also very important to is to create the space, from what I'm hearing, right? Of like, to intentionally have the space to explore this. And I'm leaning towards the let's explore this together. Like, it's not something that we explore on our own, but let's explore it together and create conversations around it, and add play to it, add role play and storytelling. Because one of the things that is very, I would say, how I got into this topic, and how I reached out to you, Milena, was the realization that when we really think about neurodivergence, we often think of either kids who are in trouble or adults who are struggling. And that's just like that's the visual that's automatically put in reference to neurodivergence. And one of the things that I'm really looking at is that, yeah, people grow, people age, and we have such a big gap in our awareness of how are people, neurodivergent people, doing when it comes to aging. I know there has been some unfortunate and very painful instances where they are placed in care homes and they cannot be supported because those that are the caregivers are not trained to understand neurodiversity and to know how to respond to people. So there's that lack of awareness, and then there's also this lack of space in which we can bring this conversation forward. And I'm really glad that your foundation, Hekate, is doing this amazing job of bringing this to our awareness and bringing all the advocacies there. So are there specific projects or activities that the foundation has been doing recently that we need to share and talk to about in terms of conscious aging?
Well, as I mentioned, Lana, we are, first of all, we are building our conscious aging European network, and and global network, international network. So we are very happy to collaborate, and I was so glad to start to collaborate with you as the Neurodivergent Academy, because as you mentioned, I don't have the answer. I mean, I really believe in diversity, and I see only those questions you brought up with how can we work with aging in the here and now when basically we cannot go. So I think the work we and the collaborations we are seeking is to reach out and to collaborate with different communities to see, okay, how does conscious aging resonates and can be adapted or implemented or used in different communities, and build it together so it's a collaboration. And how can we invite creating space, Lana? And I think this is the conscious part, because aging happens naturally, but conscious aging doesn't. And this is the conscious part, creating space, promoting dialogue. And this is what where we are, open to collaboration for, or with other communities and other people, and also with you. And if there is one action, is just to explore how can we work together in the future, and what are the programs, or what are your needs, or how can we, yes, develop this approach together. And if anyone, in your communities have this need, has this need, or intention or impulse to reach out, feel free. Lana and Saskia can, but I think my contact details are also in the in. So reach out and see how can we do. Um,
Something that's already coming in through the chat, Miléna, is that probably for neurodivergent is creating a space and an opportunity to consider these questions is
exactly.
very, very important. And then probably also support to hang on to those ideas and make sure that we turn them into something actionable. Because otherwise, we have a great conversation, we have beautiful insights, but nothing more happens. And with executive functioning issues, that's a very common problem around everything. So, how do you not only create the space for the conversation and the prompts that help us think through what is needed, but also then break that down into stuff that people can actually incorporate and manage to take action on a day-to-day basis to build a pattern of conscious aging, not just one moment of considering it.
Saskia, may I suggest, based on what you've just said, may I suggest a round of, after after having this conversation, what is one action you will take, Anna, Saskia? Very small action. It can be like, I don't know, whatever, but what you will do.
Mhm.
Uh,
Well, this is already, and I'm gonna be referencing Richard Kirk, who's been messaging in LinkedIn. Thank you for all your what's this, your engagement in the chat. I really love what he just shared in terms of, yeah, how can we have a remembering of what we're talking about here. So I'm compelled to, hey, maybe there's something here that we can create together, either as an exploratory guide, or what's this, a series of prompts or reflection questions. When you're a Diversity Education Academy, part of the advocacy that we've been doing is to create resources and materials. So if you check out neurodiversityeducationacademy.org, you'll find quite a lot of digital resources that you can download for free. And it seems like, yeah, for me at least, that's an impulse that I'm getting, is maybe we can just create a simple guide around conscious aging and prompts around it that can support people when when they are in the space of exploring it at their own time, at their own pace. What do you think about that idea, Saskia, Milena?
it's not that small.
I think it's a wonderful idea, and I will just, since you answered on the community level, Lana, I'll answer on a much more personal level, because I think it's important to note, as Milana did in her answers to my questions as well, that very often the solutions to this are very personal. So I think maybe part of what we should be creating are ways to find those personalized answers, because those are also that much more actionable, because you have a really clear view of what you're going to do, what context is going to prompt you doing these things, and how it's going to contribute to your personal well-being and being in a process of conscious aging. I think for me, what I will try to do personally is to, um, around the experiences I'm having caring for my parents, create more conversations with people around my age, like my sister, my husband, my friends, to reflect on what I'm seeing there and the choices that I would hopefully make for myself in the future. And Richard also in the chat, I think, mentioned that part of that is also considering, like, how do I want to be active in old age, and what skills or things do I want to build towards. So that could be learning a new skills that you can practice even after your retirement, but it could be many other things as well. It could be preparing for where and how you want to live. But those are the sorts of conversations I aim to have more on a more regular basis going forward.
Thank you, Saskia. I love this talking about, because I believe in this, this snowball effects. Just start the conversation, just, yeah, changing the narrative, not having something that instead of avoiding or having a resistance towards, just make it a normal conversation topic. I love that.
Mm. Wow. We're very, very grateful for you, Milena, to have said yes to our invitation for this conversation, for exploring conscious aging with us. And I know this is just like we're just not even scratching the surface here. We're just barely, barely.
Introduce the topic, yes.
Exactly, we're just very, very much on on the top of the iceberg, and and I know there's a lot of layers more to peel. And this is also why after our conversation with you, Saskia and I, we were thinking about what will be a good theme for next year in terms of the different community gatherings and neuro emergence. So you will be proud that we have chosen conscious living as our main theme for next year, to really invite us in this exploration of how can we live consciously, how can we approach life in a way that is regenerative, in a way that is flourishing for everyone. And our tagline has been, bridging the gaps where all neurotypes can thrive. And I know this conversation is a big part of how we can look into that thriving. So thank you very much,
Thank,
Milena, for being here.
thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm very much looking forward to the next step and exploring more this topic with you.
Saskia, any last thoughts?
Yeah, no, just that small actions are really key. And I think a lot of the time with a stressed brain, and sometimes that means a neurodivergent stressed brain, it's easy to go into the black and white thinking, like I need to have this all worked out right now. But rather than stay stuck there, please focus on the little tiny actions you can take, the little tiny steps you can take away from this, because that will already snowball into bigger changes.
So thank you, everyone. And
Thank
for
you,
those
everyone.
watching this, I do hope you add in your questions and we'll be going back and answering them. Thank you.